With England's first match at the 2018 FIFA World Cup in Russia under a week away, Gareth Southgate has picked his 23-man England squad and selected Harry Kane to lead them as captain. This was followed by a press conference where the new skipper gave the online and print media the headline they were looking for: England can win the World Cup. While this statement is technically true, those of us who have followed the national team for any length of time can't help but roll our eyes and say, "Okay, mate," while silently hoping that somehow it'll all come together this summer. Soon after, however, the coverage of England took a familiar turn when the press pounced on Raheem Sterling for having a machine gun tattooed on his leg. Once again, the focus of the media was not to brew excitement, encouragement and unity, but rather to systematically begin scapegoating individual players in order to preempt the usual tournament failure we as fans have come to expect. This is not a new phenomenon, but rather the latest turn in a cycle of disappointment that defines the English national team. To understand what's happening here in the build-up to this tournament, we first need to examine history and see how 30 years of hurt, as sang by the Lightning Seeds more than 2 decades ago, has dragged on past 40 and now 50 years of hurt. In the late 60s, English football was in its pomp. Alf Ramsey's Brave Lions had successfully captured the Jules Rimet Trophy on home soil, and Manchester United had become the first English club to win the European Cup. All seemed good even as England fell to Yugoslavia in the semi-finals of the fledgling UEFA European Championship, but when the time came to defend their world title in Mexico in 1970, a worrying trend began. England were strong favourites against West Germany in the quarter-finals and led 2-0 with just a quarter of the match remaining. Thinking the match was won, Ramsey substituted Bobby Charlton, but Peter Bonetti, a last-moment replacement for the imperious Gordon Banks in goal, committed 3 howlers as England crashed out in extra time. Combining the fact that Banks was not injured, but rather came down with mysterious food poisoning on the eve of the match, and the controversial arrest of captain Bobby Moore before the tournament even began, the English fans had their first taste of injustice that would become a familiar feeling after many tournaments to come. England hit new lows throughout the rest of the decade in the 1970s, not qualifying for either the 1974 or 1978 World Cups. They would qualify again in 1982, where they boasted a group of seasoned players at a time when English clubs dominated European football. Despite winning the European Cup that very year, none of the Aston Villa players in the squad played a single minute, and England were eliminated without losing a game at the second group stage. England returned to Mexico in 1986 with deadly goalscorer Gary Lineker firing on all cylinders. His 6 goals were enough for the Golden Boot, but a miss from point-blank range in a quarter-final, infamous for Diego Maradona scoring the most controversial goal in history, as well as arguably the best goal in history, just minutes later, saw England's tournament come to a bitter end. Given that Maradona and company went on to lift the trophy, the sense of injustice and bitterness was only made stronger. England lost all 3 games at the 1988 Euros before reaching the semi-finals of the 1990 World Cup for the first time since winning the tournament on home soil. It was here that England would discover a new nemesis, the penalty shootout. After hitting the post and having a goal disallowed in extra time against West Germany, misses from Stuart Pearce and Chris Waddle broke English hearts. After this tournament, optimism was sky high as England seemed to be back on the rise, but a group stage exit at the 1992 Euros followed by a failure to qualify for the 1994 World Cup put England firmly back on square one. With that, we reach 1996, when England hosted the Euros on home soil and many felt they were destined to end their 30 years of hurt. Despite leading in the semi-final against Germany, the match went to penalties after an extra-time period where Paul Gascoigne agonisingly missed a golden chance to win the match. This time it was Gareth Southgate, of all people, who missed the decisive penalty, as England had to watch on as Germany were handed the trophy by the Queen in their home stadium. 2 years later, once again, penalties undid the Three Lions as they fell to Argentina in a match remembered for teenage Michael Owen's wonder goal and David Beckham's red card, the latter of which led to a national witch hunt that too has become a trend in English media. At Euro 2000, England fell at the group stage and it was Phil Neville's turn to be abused after giving away the penalty that allowed Romania to knock England out. Sven-Göran Eriksson took over the manager role and qualified for the 2002 World Cup in a campaign remembered for David Beckham's redemption as captain. Tournament was reasonably positive despite a quarter-final defeat to eventual winners Brazil, the only blot coming from David Seaman's embarrassment at being lobbed from 40 yards by Ronaldinho. The 2004 Euros ended in more penalty heartbreak against hosts Portugal before the same happened again against the same opposition at the World Cup in Germany 2 years later. This time, Wayne Rooney became the scapegoat after his red card when playing too soon after a foot break. Frank Lampard also missed a chance in extra time eerily similar to Gazza's miss 10 years earlier. England failed to qualify for the 2008 Euros, with Paul Robinson and Scott Carson seeing their England careers end after howlers in 2 different defeats to Croatia. Rob Green met a similar fate at the 2010 World Cup, when his dreadful error allowed the USA to draw and eventually top the group, leading England onto the far more difficult side of the draw, where they were pummeled 4-1 by Germany in a game remembered for the goal that never was, cruelly denying England an equaliser and Lampard a World Cup goal that he would never end up getting. 2012 rolled around and more penalty heartbreak followed as England were eliminated by Italy this time. The 2014 World Cup was transitional as England's fading golden generation were joined in the squad by a hodgepodge of young talent and journeymen. England fell without winning a game in a tough group that was somehow topped by Costa Rica. The latest chapter, though, is perhaps the most humiliating, as Iceland, a nation with more volcanoes than professional footballers, knocked them out in the last 16, drawing unprecedented ire from the fans. This, seemingly, was the final straw, as the FA then announced its plans to revamp the way young footballers are brought through the England system, with the hopes of establishing a footballing identity that has been missing for decades. So here we are, qualified and ready for another World Cup, with reasons for positivity being drowned by an unrelenting feeling that we've seen this all before. Goalkeeping errors, red cards, missed sitters, bad luck, and penalty heartbreak that lead the Lions that left the tournament returning home as scapegoats for another national embarrassment, and many saying they no longer care. And yet, in the 2 years that pass between each tournament, hope slowly builds beneath the surface of our glum and resigned faces. But the likelihood of a good tournament is far less likely than another heartbreak born out of getting your hopes up just in time to be crushed. The media is partly to blame. After all, national embarrassments sell more papers than a decent quarter-final run. They begin targeting players like Raheem Sterling before they've even gotten on the plane, in the hopes of damaging the confidence of a player that has played well all season. For as long as the public is swayed by the narrative that their players are overpaid layabouts that can't be bothered to win any games in the month of June and would rather go on holiday than go to the semi-finals, the cycle of disappointment will continue, and 52 years of hurt will go on. Thanks for watching. P.S. If this World Cup doesn't involve Raheem Sterling scoring a goal and celebrating by lying on his back pretending to shoot his leg like a gun, then we've all wasted our time.